The Universal Christ. How a forgotten reality can change everything we see, hope for, and believe. By Richard Rohr. Appendix 2. The Pattern of Spiritual Transformation. Even inside an incarnational worldview, we grow by passing beyond some perfect order, through a usually painful and seemingly unnecessary disorder, to an enlightened reorder or resurrection. This is the pattern that connects and solidifies our relationship with everything around us. The trajectory of transformation and growth, as I see the great religious and philosophical traditions charting it, uses many metaphors for this pattern. We could point to the classic hero's journey charted by Joseph Campbell, the 4 seasons or 4 directions of most native religions, the epic accounts of Exodus, exile and promised land of the Jewish people, followed by the cross, death, and resurrection narrative of Christianity. Here I offer a distillation that might help you see all of these trajectories in a common and very simple, almost too simple way. Each of these myths, and each in its own way, is saying that growth happens in this full sequence. To grow toward love, union, salvation, or enlightenment, I use the words almost interchangeably. We must be moved from order to disorder, and then ultimately to reorder. Order. At this first stage, if we are granted it, and not all are, we feel innocent and safe. Everything is basically good. It all means something, and we feel a part of what looks normal and deserved. It is our first naivete. It explains everything, and thus feels like it's straight from God, solid and forever. Those who try to stay in this first satisfying explanation of how things are and should be will tend to refuse and avoid any confusion, conflict, inconsistencies, suffering, or darkness. They do not like disorder in any form. Even many Christians do not like anything that looks like carrying the cross. This is the huge price we have paid for just thanking Jesus for what he did on the cross instead of actually imitating him. Disorder or change is always to be avoided, the ego believes. So let's just hunker down and pretend that my status quo is entirely good, should be good for everybody, and is always true, and even the only truth. But permanent residence in this stage tends to create either willingly naive people or control freaks, and very often a combination of both. I have found it invariably operates from a worldview of scarcity and hardly ever from abundance. Disorder. Eventually, your ideally ordered universe, your private salvation project, as Thomas Merton called it, must and will disappoint you, if you are honest. As Leonard Cohen puts it, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Your wife dies. Your father loses his job. You were rejected on the playground as a child. You find out you are needy and sexual. You fail an exam for a coveted certification, or you finally realize that many people are excluded from your own well-deserved life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the disorder stage, or what we call from the Adam and Eve story, the fall. It is necessary in some form, if any real growth is to occur. But some of us find this stage so uncomfortable, we try to flee back to our first created order, even if it is killing us. Others today seem to have given up and decided that there is no universal order, or at least no order we will submit to. That's the postmodern stance, which distrusts all grand narratives, ideologies, and globalism, including often any notions of reason, the common human nature, social progress, universal human norms, absolute truth, and objective reality. Much of the chaos that reigns in the American culture and government these days is the direct result of such a post-truth society. Permanent residence in this stage tends to make people rather negative and cynical, usually angry and quite opinionated and dogmatic about one form of political correctness or another, as they search for some solid ground. Some accuse religious people of being overly dogmatic, yet this stymied position worships disorder itself as though it were a dogma. I reject all universal explanations except one. There are no universal explanations, it seems to be saying. Such universal cynicism and skepticism become the universal explanation, their operative religion, and also their great vulnerability. Reorder. Every religion, each in its own way, is talking about getting you to this reorder stage. Various systems would call it enlightenment, exodus, nirvana, heaven, salvation, springtime, or even resurrection. It is the life on the other side of death, the victory on the other side of failure, the joy on the other side of the pains of childbirth. It is an insistence on going through, not under, over, or around. There is no non-stop flight to reorder. To arrive there, we must endure, learn from, and include the disorder stage, transcending the first naive order, but also still including it. It amounts to the best of the conservative and the best of the liberal positions. They hold on to what was good about the first order, but also offer it very needed correctives. People who have reached this stage, like the Jewish prophets, might be called radical traditionalists, loving their truth and their group enough to critique it, critiquing it enough to maintain their own integrity and intelligence. These wise ones have stopped overreacting, but also overdefending. They are usually a minority of humans. Based on years of spiritual direction with people both in the United States and in other countries, I have observed that the implications of this journey are different for those who identify as either conservative or liberal. Conservatives must let go of their illusion that they can order and control the world through religion, money, war, or politics. This is often their real security system. Their intense religious language often shows itself to be a pretense and a cover for a very conservative politics. True release of control to God will show itself as compassion and generosity and less boundary keeping. Liberals, however, must surrender their belief in permanent disorder and their horror of all leadership, eldering, or authority, and find what was good, healthy, and deeply true about a foundational order. This will normally be experienced as a move toward humility and real community. They must stop reacting against all authority and tradition and recognize these are necessary for continuity in a culture along with basic mental health, which allows them to belong to something besides themselves. To move toward greater wholeness, both groups, each in different way, must let go of their false innocence. Both liberals and conservatives are seeking separateness and superiority, just in different ways. In my language, they both must somehow be wounded before they can give up these foundational illusions. The recovery movement calls this step one, the admission of powerlessness. This journey from order to disorder to reorder must happen for all of us. It is not something just to be admired in Abraham, Moses, Job, or Jesus. Our role is to listen and allow, and at least slightly cooperate with this almost natural progression. We all come to wisdom at the major price of both our innocence and our control. which means that few go there willingly. Disorder must normally be thrust upon us. Why would anyone choose it? I wouldn't. I want to repeat that there is no nonstop flight from order to reorder, or from disorder to reorder, unless you dip back into what was good and helpful, but also limited about most initial presentations of order, and even the tragedies of disorder or wounding. Otherwise, you spend too much of your life rebelling, reacting, and suffocating. I'm not sure why God created the world that way, but I have to trust the universal myths and stories. Between beginning and end, the great stories inevitably reveal a conflict, a contradiction, a confusion, a fly in the ointment of our self-created paradise. And this sets the drama in motion and gives it momentum and humility. Everybody, of course, initially shoots for happiness, but most books I have ever read seem to be some version of how suffering refined, taught, informed people. Maintaining our initial order is not of itself happiness. We must expect and wait for a second naivete, which is given more than it is created or engineered by us. Happiness is the spiritual outcome and result of full growth and maturity. And this is why I am calling it reorder. You are taken to happiness. You cannot find your way there by willpower or cleverness. Yet we all try. We seem insistent on not recognizing the universal pattern of growth and change. Trees grow strong by reason of winds and storms. Boats were not meant to live in permanent dry dock or harbor. Baby animals must be educated by their mothers in the hard ways of survival, where they almost always die young. It seems that each of us has to learn on our own, with much kicking and screaming, what is well hidden, but also in plain sight.